Good morning, friends. Welcome along to episode 13 of Sweet Tea and Coffee. We made it. We've been here.
This is it.
13. Yeah, this is it. This is our final. No, I'm just kidding. Not the final episode. Man, I hope you enjoyed last week. We had an absolute blast chatting with Bryn Williford, and I'm just telling you, we have loved the interview versions of this.
You just never know what you're going to get. Never know what you're going to get.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And but unfortunately, we're not doing that today. So you are stuck with us. You're going to hear a little bit of my story and how I got here and some of that backstory and some kind of interesting things regarding leadership that in reflecting on this, we've come up with. So stick around. Episode 13.
All right. Well, let's go, folks. That's hard to say. Let's go, folks.
Is that going to be your line from now on?
No, it's not. I actually stole that from another podcast. If you listen to that podcast, You'll know what I'm talking about. John Kennan, you know what I'm talking about. I'm going to put a shout out in there for him.
Wow. It's episode 13.
He texted me last night. It was like, you've got to work that into the podcast. So
I don't know. Like, it doesn't, I don't know that it fits you.
It doesn't.
I actually like folks fit.
I like.
Very
well, I like hello, folks. I think that fits
I don't
me a little
know.
more.
It just doesn't. It doesn't roll off your tongue. It's not super smooth.
It's not. I don't know if it's smooth I think that's the point. I don't think it's supposed to be smooth.
I don't know.
Anyway,
well, if you want to write in and tell us what you think, you go ahead.
We're gonna continue with what we with this episode and not chase that rabbit trail any further. So it's we're coming up on a milestone. November is 10 years that Kendall has been at Fredonia Hill.
Oh yeah.
And then as soon as he hits that milestone, we're gonna kick him out the door.
That's right.
And he's going to go on sabbatical. We'll talk about that more later, but we thought it'd be kind of cool to reflect on how he even got here. So that's where we're going to start today. Kendall's been all over the country and the world. He's a world traveler.
Oh, easy. I don't know.
And, he's been foreign and exotic places like West Texas and Missouri, and now here in Nacogdoches. So we wanted to kind of take a look at some of those areas and see kind of what God was up to in those moments and how he got here. So let's just start. I'm always intrigued by West Texas because I don't understand it. I went out to West Texas last year. Now, not the same part as you're talking about. This one actually had a little more terrain to it, had mountains and hills.
Well, I mean, West Texas
and it was
has
nice.
A variety.
But
terrain.
It was like about a week into it, I was like, okay, where are the trees? I'm ready to be back home, So let's start there because I'm always intrigued by West Texas.
Yeah.
So we know that you grew up in you grew up in Midland.
Yeah.
And then went to Dallas-Fort Worth area and then back to Lubbock for college.
That's right.
Then what?
Well, West Texas is kind of always in my blood, and so we grew up Red Raider fans, and so it's kind of always just I'm going back to Lubbock for school. Never really thought much about it. So anyway, did my undergrad at Tech. That's where Lindsay and I met. We've covered that ground on the podcast before. But I in high school, I had people describe it as a sense of a call to ministry, and some people are a little bit more clear on that than others. I had no idea in terms of.
Right.
What does that actually look like? I've talked to people before, and I'm always amazed at this. And there's no right or wrong. It's just interesting, the different journeys. But where people have this call to ministry, and they know, I want to be in youth ministry, or I want to be a pastor, or I did not have any clarity on. I just knew, I just had a sense that God was calling me to ministry. What does that look like? And then had an interesting meeting with a guy. I got invited to a Bible study at this couple's house and was sitting in the living room. And I'd met this guy a couple of times. I'd been to the Bible study a couple of times and just had this very real sense of God nudging me to say, listen, the guy that was leading the Bible study, he was a pastor. And to say, you need this guy to invest in your life. You don't have anybody that is really deeply investing in your life right now. No other man that's really deeply investing in your life right now. And this is a guy that needs to do that. So I kind of summoned up the courage. And this was during I was finishing up my undergrad. Lindsay and I were either engaged at this point or about to get engaged. Right. And we were already dating. And so anyway, I summoned up the courage to go, okay, I don't really know you, but I just feel like I need some mentorship, some guidance, some counseling. I need a friend. And I think a lot of that's because of, we've covered it in previous episodes. That's always been part of my life.
Right.
And so I think that for a span of 3 years, I didn't have that. And so anyway, I asked him what that would look like. And he just kind of immediately took me under his wing. And we started meeting on a weekly basis and studying scripture together and starting a friendship. And that blossomed over the next few years into, he got an opportunity. This was such a neat story. He got an opportunity to pastor a church in a town that he lived in, he grew up in, and that his parents were in. A tiny little town called Sundown. We call it Sundown, America. And
Sundown, America.
Yeah, that's right. Sundown, America. It's not Sundown, Texas. It's Sundown, America. And anyway, he'd grown up there and pastored for a short stint. It's a very small town, so did some bivocational ministry stuff, worked in the oil field, and then got the opportunity after he'd retired from the oil field to come back and pastor this little church. But before that, and that's where that's the first time I stepped into vocational ministry. He asked me to be the youth pastor there. But before that, we were doing this little house church in Lubbock while I was an undergrad, finishing up my undergrad. And part of my, I guess, vocational development was in pastoring this church, he just invited me in to help him do it and made me, it's a house church. So part of staff, that's a pretty strong term for what we were doing, but just said, look, these young men need to be invested in. You invest in these young men. He let me preach. He let me help think through just theologically, what should church look like. He helped me make, decisions. And it was really a powerful time. He just handed me the keys. I didn't know at the time. I didn't have any sense at the time of really what was going on.
Right.
But he was very intentionally and methodically giving me an opportunity to explore what God might be doing in my life and watching the whole time. And so anyway, we did the house church for a couple of years. And then there was a short stint where he was transitioning from that house church to being the pastor at the church in Sundown, where I actually got to pastor. It was basically like an interim job. I got to pastor this house church for a short time. So that was wild. I mean,
You're a kid.
I'm a kid, and so pastored this house church, which was amazing. And then became youth pastor in Sundown under his leadership. And much of the same. I mean, I got to preach often. Yeah. And be involved in a whole lot more than youth ministry. So, man, it was an incredible several years being under his leadership, and is still a wonderful friend and mentor today. And but that was kind of the West Texas story, and pastored there. It was an amazing season. So many things happened in our life. This is where we met our daughter, who was in our youth group that we eventually adopted. I feel like I got to see and explore a call to ministry in a really unique way because of the opportunities that he gave, and in the town that we were in. Sundown is an amazing and unique place, and so it was there was a lot of formation happening, and all the while, I had no idea. It still was not clear to me what I wanted to be when I grew up.
Yeah.
You know,
you were doing ministry and doing things, but it wasn't like, oh, this is it.
Yeah, and never at any point did I go, okay, I'm doing youth ministry now, but just wait, I'll be a pastor someday.
Yeah.
I just had no, and it may sound terrible, I had no climb the ladder career ambition. And I'm not saying that I had a level of clarity to know that I didn't want that at the time. I think I was just still learning how to discern God's call. And so I didn't have that. And so I was just kind of wandering along, just kind of taking in all that ministry was and under his leadership. And so it was a really formational time. It didn't last but a few years. It was a short stint in our life. It was a couple of years.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So it eventually comes to an end. You're not still there right now. And you pivoted and transitioned into a different direction, a really kind of unique position. So tell me how that happened.
Well, this is an interesting turn in the story. because, and again, all this is in reflection. You don't know these things at the time. I was growing restless, and I would say, I would even use the word discontent. I was discontent, and a lot of that, Blake, was stemming from, I would say, some pride.
Yeah.
And anyway, just a discontentedness. Well, if you sit in that very long, you become very ineffective in ministry.
Yeah.
And, honestly, looking back, I think that level of discontentedness was going to, over a period of time, going to cause me to be ineffective and apathetic in the place that I was. And God had to root that out. If my life was going to be filled with ministry, that's going to have to go. Mm-hmm. And I think it's one of those deals where God says it can go by me telling you about it and then you repenting, or it can go the hard way. And I think God probably told us about it, and yeah, okay, whatever. But I wasn't interested in much change, and so it kind of had to go the hard way. Well, I had a good friend that I'd known from Midland days who was running a very interesting ministry. That the idea of this ministry was that they would come alongside different ministries that were either startup or that were struggling.
Okay.
And they would come alongside those ministries, and they would either try to get them off the ground, and they would help. It was basically personnel help. So that he would help pastor these folks, encourage these folks, supply some maybe personnel if they needed just different people on the ground to get things going or to recover, would supply that. And so it was a small team, but they would work with everything from bands to youth groups,
right,
to churches, to illusionists. And anyway, one of the things that they were wanting to do is they were wanting to start a training school where the idea was that after kids graduated high school, they would go take a year and be at this training school, and they were getting off the ground. And I heard about that, and I wanted to be involved.
Yeah, sounds fun.
It sounds fun, and it matched my heart, I think, for ministry and wanting to train people. But it also kind of gave me an escape, and the grass is always greener kind of thing.
Right.
And it kind of satisfied this discontentedness. Oh, well, I'll just go do that. Well, the opportunity came, and we got to move to Sweet Springs, Missouri. Now, for us, it wasn't a big deal. We were going from Sundown to Sweet Springs, so town of 1,000 people to a town of 1,000 people. But it was in Missouri.
Yeah.
And we're not from Missouri, nor do we have any family in Missouri. It was middle of nowhere. And very quickly after we got there, the progression of the school came to a screeching halt. There was all sorts of remodeling and stuff that had to happen. And so there was basically, long story short, there was nothing for me to do. So here we were. We'd resigned our job in Sundown, got to Sweet Springs, and fantastic people, wonderful people there. But it was like, okay, we got to get Kendall on a job. He's got to do something. And so the opening was to go on the road with an illusionist. I wish I could see my face when this was pitched to me.
I'm just seeing like Michael Scott with this like fire coming out of his hands and the fake bird and the wand.
Yeah. Well, I had no idea. I don't know anything about magic or illusion or, showmanship or whatever. So, but my job was going to be, and this guy, the illusionist, had a phenomenal ministry, would go to college campuses all over the country and did a incredible illusionist show. But the concept was to go to college campuses and demonstrate to people that you can be deceived, that your five senses can be deceived.
Right.
And what's the only way that you really know the truth? And the only way you really know the truth is if the author comes out from behind the curtain and reveals truth, because you can be deceived by what you see. It was amazing. Anyway, he's a really cool guy and has done a lot of really cool stuff in ministry. But that was the gig, and he needed somebody to basically be like a road manager, road pastor, and also be part of the show. So here comes Kendall.
You're the assistant.
Yeah, I'm the assistant. So I did everything from. Now I didn't coordinate travel or anything, but when we were there, I was the liaison between this guy and whoever we were working for. And I was part of the show. Like I was the MC of the show, and which was great. But what was so cool, I think, about that was that we were traveling. I mean, I was gone 3 or 4 days a week, every week. That was really hard.
Yeah.
We had just had Shiloh, an adopted daughter who was a senior in high school, and that was hard for us to move that far away from even her home. And she was a trooper and came with us, and for her senior year of high school, it was a lot of strain. I was gone 4 days a week, and but I basically traveled the country and visited, over the course of a year and a half or whatever, a lot of college campuses. We would do 2 or 3 shows a week.
Yeah.
And I had no ambition at the time to be a college pastor or whatever. I just was doing.
Here's the opportunity, and this is what I'm. Yeah.
And so, but we would travel all over the place, and I got to see the entire landscape, basically, of collegiate ministry through the whole country over this year and a half. But man, I want to just tell you, it's one of the hardest stretches of life that we've worked through, because it didn't satisfy discontentedness. It didn't. I mean, I was working, and I was grateful for work for sure, but I was gone from my family a lot. Being on the road is not easy. That's a strain anyway, even if you want to be there. But
it's tough.
It's tough. And what was really cool, and this is going to become a pattern, but the guy that was in charge of the ministry, not the illusionist, but the guy that was in charge of the ministry in Missouri, I think really saw at that point that I was there for something very different than, building this ministry and being there long term. I think he saw that God needed to work some things out in me. Yeah. And so he knew that I was frustrated, that I was anxious, and he had the wisdom and the patience to just kind of go, okay, I'm with you and I want to encourage you, but I'm not taking you out of this.
Yeah.
God has something for you here, and if you don't hang in here long enough, you're going to miss it. And so it was the scenario. God had to take us all the way to Missouri in the freezing cold, and for me to be on the road, that long to finally go, okay, there's some stuff in my heart that I need to deal with.
Out. Yeah.
And it was the first time, in 3 years that I'd really come before God and go, okay, I got a pride issue. Like I got some stuff that you need to work out in me. I've got a false view of what this is supposed to look like and my role in it. And God, I need you to deal with some of this. And we embraced that, and massive credit to Lindsay. She was right there the whole way, and encouraging and never frustrated, in it. But I had to come before God and go, okay, the most important thing that can happen right now is not me being effective in this ministry or doing, the most important thing that can happen right now is for you to deal with me the way you want to deal with me, for you to root out the things you need to root out. And so when I embraced that, it did not get easier.
Yeah.
We were still on the road, but I had a clarity that I'd not had in years. And I knew that what God needed to do, I wanted him to do, and whatever that cost. And that was really important to come to that place.
Your circumstances don't necessarily change. You're still doing the same things, but it's just with a different outlook and attitude about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So what's interesting is that after about 6-8 months of that process, the ministry opportunity there kind of dried up. And it was a contract deal.
Yeah.
The way they had to work basically year to year. Who do they need? Who do they not need? And the school wasn't ready, and I wasn't going to do the illusionist thing again. And so it was like, okay, there's really nothing.
What's next?
Yeah. Either you need to kind of say, this is the role I'm going to play in this ministry, and here's what I'm going to do, or it probably needs to be over. And so that was going away. I had nothing, but man, Blake, there was for the first time in years, there was a peace and a contentedness that I had not experienced before. I wasn't necessarily worried about it. I knew that God was having his way in me the way that he needed to. And there was just this profound sense of, okay, God's got this, and whatever kind of needs to come about will come about. And it was not super long after that I got a random email from a guy named Pat Kelly from Nacogdoches.
So that's interesting. That just comes, an email just shows up from a
It's
person
an
you have no idea who this person is.
No clue. I'd never met Pat before. Pat was, just for those of you listening, Pat was a pastor here at Fredonia Hill, and before I was. And so this email comes across, and he basically says, hey, our wives went to high school together, and we've been kind of tracking your journey through social media. And this is when I was still on social media.
Still,
when I was
on the grid still.
young and hip and cool. And we've seen all this college ministry that you've been doing, and we're familiar with the ministry. They had interacted with the ministry before. And we've just arrived here in Nacogdoches, and we really want to invest in college students here. Is it something that you would be interested in looking at? And here's the funny part of this story, is that I didn't know who he was. And so I took that email home and kind of blew it off. Like I just went, Linz, I got this random email. It's kind of weird. Like, I don't know this guy. I don't know Nacogdoches. This is kind of weird. I don't know. I'm just not really even good. Thanks, but no thanks.
Yeah.
Kind of deal. And this is where we need our wives, where the Holy Spirit works through our wives. And Lindsay just kind of, in her own sweet way, she said, no, I think that's really important. And I think you need to think about responding differently. I think God may have something for us there. And so anyway, long story, even longer, I just I reached back out to Pat, and they were so gracious and hosted us for a weekend. We just said, can we come see Nacogdoches? I'm from West Texas. I'm from the desert. I've never been east of Tyler.
Yeah.
So they invited us down. We got to come see. They hosted us and got to come see. And man, we just immediately just fell in love with this community.
Yeah.
The church was great, but we didn't know anybody there, but just this community. And so that's how we arrived. We obviously went through the interview process, and I had never once thought I want to be a college pastor, but here I was through this very strange set of circumstances stepping into the job as college pastor, and with a clarity and a contentedness that I'd never had before, which was cool because I needed that. Had I not gone to Missouri,
right. Well, and I just think from an experience standpoint, I think it's huge. You briefly mentioned it, but just all the different college campuses you visited all over the nation.
Yeah.
I have experience with like 3 college campuses, and they're pretty local, so to see kind of how ministry was happening and how students were responding in different places is incredible experience for collegiate ministry, which at the time you probably had no idea you were moving that direction.
Yeah, did not know at the time I was training for that. But yeah, it was a perspective. And honestly, what had happened over that year and a half that I was traveling with the Illusionists was I really fell in love with college students.
Yeah.
I saw, man, they are so hungry for truth. I saw that. I saw a willingness and an openness to dialogue and have discussion and search. And I just went, man, this is fertile ground for the gospel, and just really fell in love with that stage of life and ministry in that area, and then got to do that. But again, had no career clarity. Even stepping into that college pastor position here in Nacogdoches, had no real career clarity. Didn't think, oh, okay, I'm going to do this for a while, and then I'm going to be a pastor.
Right.
I was just, wow, I'm doing college ministry, and I love this, and I love teaching, and had no career ambition up to that point, which is interesting. But it was a great 7 years of doing that.
Wow, 7 years.
Yeah, I think that's about right. I think it's about 7
Somewhere
years
around there.
of college ministry. Yeah.
That's crazy.
So,
I'll say this. I remember when you first came here. I wasn't at Fredonia at the time. I was still at First Baptist. And I was at noon lunch one day at the BSM. And you came in with like some real hip hat on, I remember.
Oh, yeah.
You always had these really fly hats that you wore out on the
That's
fly.
right.
That's the language we used back in the day.
There we go.
But I remember I was like, who's that guy over there? And somebody was like, oh, that's Kendall McDonald. He's the new college pastor.
Yeah.
And then I was like, okay, we'll see about that.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's what you said.
No, but I just remember.
I'll take him out.
I remember seeing you from a distance.
That's
and then
funny.
Shortly after,
because you moved
town.
to Houston. Yeah,
it was not long after that. So
that's funny.
But because I think at that point I was just curious because I had, and we'll get into this later, but I had done some interim work here at Fredonia Hill, and then
which we did not overlap.
We didn't
which
overlap
is crazy.
somehow. Yeah.
I didn't know who you were until we were interviewing.
Yeah.
You for the job. I say we. I wasn't, but until our church was interviewing you for the job, which is
Yeah.
crazy. We were in the same room and didn't connect. That's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, that was the extent of, I just remember that. I mean, I remember like it was yesterday. It's like 10 years ago. But yeah.
That's funny. So 7 years. I mean, I did 7 years of college ministry, and again, and I think this is the theme. This is what's cool as I look back on all these different leaders at different points in my life. Pat never really just put me in a box and said, okay, you're going to do college ministry. You're only going to do college ministry. I think he recognized, okay, these are his gifts and strengths and passions, and he turned me loose to explore those.
Yeah.
Pat gave me all sorts of opportunity to get outside the box. Pat let me preach often. Pat was always really open about decision making and listened to my opinion, even though I'm sure there were times where it was like, what is this guy thinking? And I don't know. I'm just really grateful, all three of those guys, really, for the way that, I've kind of using this phrase, formational leadership, but I think they had a sense of like, it's not my job to make him who God wants him to be. That's God's job. And I'm going to love him and serve him by giving the opportunity to explore that and encouraging him along the way. And man, I think that takes such humility to do that. And so all three of those guys, I give huge credit to even helping me come to a place where I would even be able to discern God saying that he was calling me to pastor. Had they not given me those opportunities, I don't think I would have had any idea. So anyway, it wasn't, I didn't have that kind of clarity until after Pat had already announced that he was transitioning back to Weatherford area to plant a church, and that I went. And I'd read a book by Eugene Peterson, which we mentioned a few, and it was the first time. It was that late in the game. It was the first time that I went, wait a minute, God, is that who I am? Like, is that who you are calling me to be?
Is this you've been preparing me for?
Yeah,
unknowingly all this time.
Unknowingly, is this kind of where I'm gonna end up landing? It's a strange winding road, but again, had those guys not given me opportunities like they did. Yeah, and it's challenged me even now, going, okay, how am I participating in formational leadership? I can't make people who God's called them to be.
Yeah, that's a really interesting model of formational leadership, because I think so often we think about when we're training young leaders, that's a big part of what we do here at Fredonia Hill. Is, our tendency is to say, well, let me just tell you everything that I've learned, and I want you to do it exactly like I've done it, but that's not effective at all. I think this is to really just give them space, guide them, and give them opportunities, and but to give them space to really see how God is designing them to be a leader that's huge.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that is a I know it's super cliche, and I'm not trying to do that, but that I think in ministry, that's a servant leadership model.
Yeah,
and how am I serving young leaders? Well, I'm serving them by giving them opportunity. If God has given me a platform to steward, how am I giving that away in a way that allows God to form somebody else into who they are? That's how I can serve that cause. Not by making them who I am, or not by telling them my ideas for their life, but by giving away what I have in a way that allows them to form, and being a friend to them as they go through that journey.
Yeah.
Because you're gonna need guardrails, and you're gonna need encouragement, and you're gonna need somebody to say, I don't know, have you thought about this?
Yeah.
And that I really think is effective. And that's what all three of those guys did in my life. And they did it in different ways and at different seasons. One had to do it in a season where I was not happy, and I was frustrated and discontent, and he had to be comfortable in my discontentedness because he knew that God was at work. That's got to be hard, to watch somebody kind of suffer in that, but know what they'll get out of this is far more valuable than if I just pulled them out of it. Yeah. That's exceptional wisdom in leadership. Absolutely. And so I don't know. I hope to be that kind of leader. It's what has allowed me to even see what God's got for me in my life. So anyway, that's kind of the journey. That's the long and the short of it.
No,
So here we are.
Great.
Been pastor since 2018, but been in Nacogdoches for coming up on 10 years.
Yeah.
That's cool. So
What a long, strange journey it's been.
it's a winding road, isn't it? It's a winding road. So
All right. Well, that is, we're going to conclude there with Kendall's side of things. And we're making this whole thing a two-parter. So the next part will be where we left off with me.
yeah, how did Blake arrive at Fredonia?
How did I get here? And that's a fun story in itself.
Dun, dun, dun.
All right. Well, thank you. We're just going to cut it off. I'm going to cut him off there. Thank you for listening. And we love having these podcasts, and we get so many fun responses. It's just really neat to see how you guys are interacting and coming up to us and making comments, and it's all been overwhelmingly good. And so just like to thank you for that. And just we hope that we keep it going for you. As always, if you have any suggestions of guests and topics, we will gladly take those. That's less things that Kendall will have to try to figure out.
That's right.
People just hand them to us, and we were like, oh yeah, this is perfect. So,
But we've got some exciting guests coming up. So
I actually started a calendar of trying to figure out guests instead of just like a shoot from the hip thing. We're gonna get organized here, guys. We're 13 episodes in. We're gonna get organized.
yeah, and there's some good ones coming up. So send us your emails.
stc@fredoniahill.org.
We'll see you guys soon. Adios.
See ya.